Rain poured as Daniel trudged the dirt road, boots heavy with war's weight. The house loomed, windows broken, weeds thick. On the porch, 10-year-old Lily clutched a tin of unread letters, her eyes empty from years without a father. Each step closer was either a chance or a last goodbye. The bus pulled away, leaving a long gray ribbon of smoke that thinned into the sharp autumn air. The sound of the engine faded, then disappeared, like it had never been there at all. What remained was an empty stillness, heavy enough to swallow the whole street. The soldier stood motionless, shoulders dipping under the weight of a faded duffel. In his right hand, the urn pressed cold against his skin, hard and unfeeling, like a stone forgotten by time. The gravel crunched under his old boots. Each step made a dry, brittle sound, as if the earth itself was reminding him of something he wanted to bury. The town was quiet. Windows shut, curtains drawn, a few late-season red leaves spinning down into the gutter. He lifted his face. No sun. Just a thin gray light, stirred and broken by the wind. The chill ran across the back of his neck, slipped beneath the frayed collar of his jacket. And in that instant, something stirred, a shiver, like the dark edge of an old memory pressing closer. No images, not clear ones, just the far-off thud of explosions, the stink of smoke, the white flash that lived behind shut eyelids. He tried to breathe faster, as if outrunning the memory with breath alone. His grip on the urn tightened, knuckles pale. Fear pressed in. Not of the town, not of the road that would lead him back home, but of this moment right here, where past and present blurred, threatening to swallow him whole. The gravel spoke again, quicker now, uneven. His stride picked up, like he could outwalk the smoke fading behind him. But the faster he went, the heavier the urn felt. It wasn't just ashes. It was proof that life after war never came back whole. His heart pounded hard, fast, a drumbeat that filled his chest and bled into his fingertips. The fear didn't leave, it clung to him, steady as breath. His eyes flicked over silent houses, sagging fences, yellowed patches of grass left untended. It all looked like an old photograph, still, faded, but he knew beneath it something waited, the same way memories waited, never truly gone. He stopped under the rusted sign of the old gas station. A gust carried the stale smell of oil, and just like that, he was back on the front line, fuel tanks burning, sky lit up in fire. He shuddered, shut his eyes, snapped them open again. He wouldn't let it take him back. Time gave him no choice. The past came anyway, not in sound, but in a suffocating silence. And in that silence he understood, his fear wasn't of war itself, but of the truth that war was still alive inside him, minute by minute. He straightened his back. A stiff wind tore the last thread of smoke away. The town stood bare before him, rough, cold, familiar. His eyes moved slow, window by window, porch by porch, yard by yard. This wasn't just where he'd returned. This was where the past would test him. A crow cried somewhere in the distance, ripping through the hush. He jumped, then closed his hand harder around the urn. But this time it felt different. Still cold, still heavy, but in that cold, he heard a message: carry it home, set it down, and only then will you breathe again. He walked on. Slower now, but steadier. The gravel no longer rushed, it matched the rhythm of a heart finding its pace. The fear was still there, in every leaf that stirred, every shadow stretching across old wood, but he wasn't running anymore. He knew now the only way through was forward. He exhaled, long and heavy. His breath drifted into the thin afternoon air, fading like smoke. The fear hadn't left, but it no longer owned him. He understood. Memories can't be erased, but they can be carried, not as a burden, but as bone and blood. And in that recognition, something else took root. Not peace exactly, but a seed of resilience. On the gravel road back toward town, his figure grew smaller under the bare trees. The wind stayed cold, the smoke was gone, but each step carried a new weight, the kind that said he wasn't turning back anymore. He moved slow, each step pulled back like something unseen was holding him down. The street stretched narrow and worn, lined with weathered wooden houses, paint peeling in patches like the skin of the old. The corner store had been shut for years, its wooden sign hung loose, a few faded letters left, clattering in the wind. The glass windows were covered with yellowed newspaper, the inside dark, hollow, like a box with no soul left. He stared into it the way a man stares into a hollow in his own memory, a place that once smelled of peppermint candy and rang with the cheerful jingle of a doorbell. Across the street stood the old coffee shop. The sign cracked, neon long gone cold. The wooden doors shut tight, dust thick against the seam at the bottom. He pressed closer, peered through the smeared glass. Inside, tables once covered with white cloth now sat gray and tired. A porcelain cup still leaned on its saucer, abandoned mid-moment, as if someone had stepped out for a minute and never came back. In his head, he heard the faint clink of a spoon against a cup, the small sound of mornings when the town had felt like a single shared breath. He walked on, dragging his weight. Each bit of gravel snapped under his boot and echoed through the empty street, a lonely rhythm with no reply. It felt less like the place he grew up in, more like some hollow imitation, walls and fences with no heart inside. Windows shut, curtains drawn, no faces at all. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was cold, like being locked out of something you once belonged to. He looked up at a street lamp. The glass bulb clouded over, spider cracks running across it. The wires sagged, swaying in the breeze. And just like that, the glare of floodlights on the battlefield rushed back to him, light that never felt friendly, only sharp enough to pick out targets or burn back the dark. Standing there, he felt the split deep inside. Out there, everything had been clear, you lived or you died. But here, in this town's silence, he wasn't sure if he was still alive, or just a shadow walking through what was left. Every corner mirrored some fragment of memory. The post office doors locked, iron gate rusting, the notice board faded. He remembered the flood of letters once sent, the sharp smell of ink, the brief words of home carrying more weight than whole speeches. Now it was just an empty shell, so quiet it made his chest tighten. He passed an abandoned playground. The slide rusted, the swings moving slow in the wind, creaking like tired bones. The sound cut into him. He remembered afternoons filled with laughter, the whole block alive with kids' voices. Now all that was buried under dust, just steel frames and shadows slipping between bars. He stopped at a window he knew well. Once, a bougainvillea had bloomed bright red across that wall. Now only dead vines clung to the frame. Inside, the torn curtain fluttered in the draft, waving like a cold hand. He stood still, then turned away. The town didn't seem to recognize him anymore, or maybe he was the stranger here now, even inside his own memories. Fear welled up again. He was afraid that everything he'd once held onto, the porch light, the sound of the doorbell, the smell of coffee, the laughter of kids, was gone. Afraid that war wasn't the only thing haunting him. There was also the quiet loss of a home that no longer existed. He gripped the urn tighter. The cold pressed up through his palm, into his arm. It was harsh, but it was the only anchor left. In this silent town, that urn was proof something still remained, even if only in ashes. A hard gust swept by, dragging dust and dry leaves across the street. He hunched his shoulders, but kept moving. Each step felt both lost and certain. The town wasn't welcoming him back. But it was the place he had to walk through, had to face. No turning away. No running. Somewhere deep inside, he knew the truth, both he and the town had changed. Nothing was whole anymore. All he could do was keep walking, carry the fear, but not let it bury him. His shadow stretched long across the cracked sidewalk. Each step a quiet reminder, there's still road ahead. Still strength enough to go on even if the town turns its back, even if it all feels strange. And in that strangeness, something small was taking root, resilience, quiet and stubborn, like a seed lying under dry ground, waiting for the rain to come back. The dirt road stretched out toward the edge of town, weeds pushing up through the old ruts left from last year's rain. The soldier walked slow, his shadow long across the cracked ground. The wind carried the faint smell of wood smoke, mixed with the damp scent of rotting leaves. He felt every tendon in his hand straining around the urn, as if letting go would scatter not just ashes, but the last of his memories. Then the old house came into view. No shock, no grand reveal, it was just there, standing quiet, a fixed witness to time. The porch sagged like shoulders bent from years of weight. Shingles had slipped, leaving black gaps like sunken eyes. The wooden door hung loose on its hinges, ready to rattle at the next hard gust. The steps were buried in brittle leaves. Every step would crush them, sharp and dry, like autumn whispering layer upon layer. The yard lay still, only the shadow of an old maple leaning over, its branches thin as trembling fingers. A faded American flag hung by the porch, edges frayed, barely stirring, not proud anymore but weak, like the tired breath of a symbol worn out. He stopped and let his eyes take in the place. Every detail familiar, every detail changed. The fence that had once gleamed white now sat gray, slats broken and leaning. The left window, where his mother once kept red geraniums, showed only cracked glass and thick dust. Inside was nothing but dark, no movement at all. That old fear rose again, not fear of a ruined house, but fear of seeing himself gone from it. That stepping through the door would prove there was nothing of him left here. Once, this place had been a home. Now it was only a shell. A sudden wind scattered the leaves, some brushing his worn coat before dropping to the ground. He heard the faint squeal of the hinges, a sound that froze him in place. For a second it was the scream of metal from the battlefield, a warning of danger. But no, it was only an old door, creaking with age, as weak as his own tired memories. He took another step. Leaves cracked under his boot, the sound carrying in the silence, like the whole space was listening to him. Each step toward the porch was another step toward his fear. His heart pounded hard, chest tight as stone, but beneath it he felt something else, a thin, stubborn will that pushed him forward. He thought of nights on the march, darkness all around, no clue what lay ahead. Back then, you kept moving because turning back wasn't an option. And now, in this town both known and strange, before this faded house, it felt the same. No way back. Only forward. His eyes lifted to the flag. Its torn threads shook like a labored breath. And yet, for all the fading and tearing, it was still there, still hanging. He saw himself in it, scarred, worn down, but upright, breathing, holding tight to what he carried. The leaf-covered steps looked like a test. He climbed them, dry leaves shattering underfoot, scattering around his boots. The door groaned again, a long, weary sigh, like the house itself remembering. He laid his hand on the latch, felt the wood cold, slick with years of damp. Fear rose sharp in him. Fear that when the door opened, he'd find only emptiness inside emptiness like his own soul after the war. Fear that nothing remained to hold on to but a past already rotted. But he also knew the truth, the door had to open. The only way to face it was to walk in. He tightened his grip on the urn, drew in a long breath. The autumn air was cold, dry, cutting his throat, but it steadied him. He knew he had changed. The house had changed. The past wasn't coming back. But the steps still had to be taken. The door still had to open. He stood a moment longer, looking at the faded flag, then gave a small nod, as if to tell himself he was ready. What remained wasn't wholeness, but endurance. And endurance was enough to keep him moving. The wind blew again, rattling the door with a sound that almost broke. He lifted his hand from the latch, then set it back, firmer this time. He knew what waited beyond was dust, darkness, painful memory. But maybe, just maybe, there was still something left to hold. And in that moment, he stopped running. He set the urn down on the porch step. The round porcelain touched the rotted wood with a dull little thud, like a pebble dropped into a dry well. His hand brushed the porch boards, soft, damp, giving way under his fingers. Dust smeared his skin, and a musty smell rose quick and sharp, the kind of smell you remembered from a coat after a long rain. The silence of the house wasn't empty. It was thick, holding on to the breath of those who'd once lived here, dinners left unfinished, words never said. So quiet he could hear an ant stumbling across the grain of the wood, the worn edge of the flag brushing against the post, the dry click of his own throat when he swallowed. He froze. 1 beat. 2. 3. His heart jumped short and fast, then dropped, leaving a hollow ache behind. The fear didn't crash in. It crept, brushing the back of his neck with a fingertip, light, but deep enough to remind him that once a door opened, there was no going back. He pressed his left palm against his chest, felt the pulse hammering through the worn cloth. Breathed in. Breathed out. The autumn air slid into his lungs like cold metal. He bent, tightened the lid on the urn, the way a man steadies a promise before it slips away. The gate leaned crooked, hinges bent, paint flaking like old fish scales. He set his hand on the latch. Cold. Slick. It shrieked when it turned, high and thin like a string wound too tight. The smell of rotting grass stirred up, mixed with dry earth and a faint hint of smoke drifting from far off. He shoved the gate halfway open, the other side caught in weeds, needing his shoulder to push it free. The seam of his shirt dug into his back as the cloth pulled tight. The wind came through, scattering leaves across the porch. He moved the urn to the base of a post, shielding it, checked it again with his palm, still cold, still whole, still heavy in the way things are when they've lost their shape but not their meaning. Beside the porch sat a pair of rubber boots, heels collapsed, caked with dried mud like a faded map. On the wall, an iron hook bent low, rusted, holding a frayed rope that hadn't been touched in years. Everything stood waiting, holding space for someone who'd never return. He turned to the front door. The brass handle had gone black, scratched so many times the marks made their own pattern. The hinge bulged with rust. He slid the key in, twisted. Jammed. Tried again. And again. Sweat gathered on his knuckles even in the cold. On the fourth turn, the lock gave, a rough clunk that closed out years of forgetting. He didn't open right away. He pressed his forehead to the wood, breathed in the stale paint, the dust. Heard his own heart drumming back at him. For a moment, war broke through, white flash, blunt explosion, earth shaking, grit between his teeth. But this time, it receded quicker. The memory brushed him and moved on. He went back to the step, lifted the urn into his palm, tested its weight the way a man tests a tool before working. Then he set it on the step again, right at the edge of the light, a place the sun didn't reach but where the porcelain still shone. A small act, but it felt like a ritual. Put the past where it belongs, not hidden in a pocket, not forgotten on the road, not clutched too close. Set it down, so your hands are free to open the door. Dust clung to his fingers, he brushed them against his pants. Quick, firm strokes, no hesitation. The fear still lingered at the corner of his vision, but his muscles knew what to do: turn, pull, lean, push. He drew a long breath, gripped the handle. Lowered his shoulder. Bent his knee. Power ran from heel to wrist. The door shifted. Hinges screamed. Dust fell like dry rain, dancing in the slant of light. Air spilled out, heavy and stale, smelling of old wood, paper, iron, the scent of time sealed too long. He leaned into it, let the first breath of the house slide through his chest and sink into him. The floorboard inside sagged where feet had once landed most. He tapped it with the toe of his boot. Creak. The sound ran straight up his spine, not frightening, but confirming, something here still knew his step. He crossed over. Porch shadow broke, stretched thin across the room. To the left, a narrow hall. To the right, the living room, rug worn thin, dust thick in the corners, fading toward the center. A wooden clock on the wall had died at some forgotten hour, but its minute hand still tilted forward, as if wanting to keep moving. He went back for the urn, pulled it into his chest, carried it inside. His fingers found balance without thought. With each step, the urn tapped against his hip, steady, like a far-off march, but lower, warmer. He placed it on the cabinet by the window, the spot where postcards and car keys once sat. Dust parted under it, leaving a sharp clean circle, like a period dropped in the middle of an unfinished sentence. He walked into the kitchen. The sink stained and spotted, watermarks like maps spreading across the steel. The enameled basin gone yellow. The faucet whined, spat out a thin, cold stream with a taste of rust. He washed his hands, splashed his face. The water dripped down his nose, salted his lips. The towel by the door hung stiff as cardboard. He didn't use it. Just shook his hands hard, droplets scattering across the floor, catching light like tiny glass. It cleared the air, pulled him back to now. Back in the living room, he tugged the curtain. Dust rose in a cloud, whirling in the sunlight like harmless gnats. Light spilled across the cracks in the ceiling, across the streak of paint stopped halfway up a wall years ago. He opened another window. Wind came in, tugging the fabric, rattling leaves across the floor. The flag outside flapped louder, a slow, steady beat. His hand found a broom behind the chair. He didn't hesitate. Swept. Dry leaves and dirt gathered in lines, in piles. He kept sweeping. Steady rhythm. Sweat broke at his temples. His back pulled tight. Shirt clung damp. He swept into corners, uncovering a rusted paperclip, a lost button, a strip of faded ribbon caught against the baseboard. Every scrap whispered the same thing: someone lived here. Life happened here. And now, life was inching back, not loud, not proud, but through the scratch of bristles and the measure of breath. When half the floor was clear, he straightened up, tilted his head back. His jaw loosened. Heart slowed. The fear still hovered, like a shadow waiting outside the window, but it didn't step in. It watched, while his body kept moving. Strength came from motion, from small, steady acts. He swept again. Gathered more. Pushed it out to the porch. Lifted the rug, turned it, set it back. Inch by inch, the room changed. The sound of his steps changed to lighter, surer. He paused by the urn, touched the lid. Didn't open it. Just a short, firm press. No prayer. No name. Just acknowledgement, home. Resilience wasn't born in big words. It grew in sweeping floors, opening windows, letting the first water run rusty and clear. It grew when a man stood his ground in the old house without turning away. The wind outside shifted. The faded flag caught harder, not gasping now but steady. His shadow stretched across the cabinet, then shrank as a cloud dimmed the sun. He looked around once more, the dead clock still silent, but the wall brighter, the sink still stained, but drops fresh on the floorboards still scarred, but showing their grain again. All of it saying the same thing: you can start here. He lifted the urn again, pressed it to his chest, and stepped toward the back rooms. The floor creaked, but this time it sounded like agreement. His steps were short, sure, clipped. The silence loosened, giving way to the quiet rhythm of work reclaiming a house. Ahead, the hall stretched dark, but a thin strip of light spilled from the far doorway. He walked straight into it, his palm warming against the cold porcelain, and inside him, a clean thought, needing no words: keep going. From a distance, the slam of a metal gate cracked the air, a sharp, hollow clang that cut through the smell of dust and dead leaves. The sound tore the quiet of the afternoon, running down the dark hallway like a thin blade. He stopped mid-step, the urn still in his arms, listening for the echo to come again. It did, shorter this time, with a screech and then silence. Thick, heavy silence. In it, the soldier's body shifted without thought, shoulders low, breath short, eyes scanning the window. The feeling was familiar, too familiar, but now it clung to this sagging porch, these leaf-covered steps, the wet smell of swollen wood. He set the urn back on the cabinet, its base pressing a fresh circle into the dust. His hand left the porcelain, slid along the back of a chair, across the wall, then touched the doorknob. The hinge moaned as he opened it. Wind rushed in, carrying a cloud of fine dust that spun in the slant of light. And then he saw her, a girl with tangled hair shoved through the iron gate next door, clutching an old backpack, stumbling forward like a leaf torn from its branch. She pitched forward, her knee striking the brick step with a dull, wet sound. The gate behind her slammed shut, bolt dragging into place like a final refusal. Beyond it, only darkness, no face, no voice. Just the girl, curled tight around the backpack like a shield, her shoulders trembling. Straps frayed, threads loose, a zipper dangling with a faded blue tassel. From under her arm, a spiral notebook stuck out, cover bent, its corners smudged with the blur of a wax crayon. He moved down the steps, boards creaking faster than before. His knee bent, then unlocked. His hand opened, palm out, showing he carried nothing. He walked close to the edge of the porch, boots skimming past piles of leaves to keep the sound down. The child pressed her palm against the brick, trying to rise. Her skin scraped raw, a red line thin as thread. A shoelace dragged loose in the dirt, its tip stiff with dust. He knelt but didn't reach for her. Left knee down, right foot steady, the old training holding him still as stone. No words. No name. Just breath, measured, short in, long out. The gate's rusted tang mixed with damp earth. The girl's breath was sharp, shallow, like a candle fighting wind. She hugged the bag closer, her thin back showing through her shirt. A swell rose in his chest, the instinct from old days, rushing to lift survivors from wreckage. But he held back. Instead, he moved small, precise. Reached into his coat, pulled out a folded handkerchief, turned the inside edge out to find a clean spot. It smelled of old cotton, dry, plain. He laid it on the step between them, a thin bridge either side could cross if they chose. She lifted her head. Tangled hair fell, showing the streak of dirt by her eye. No crying sound, only a quick shiver through her shoulders. She looked at the cloth, then at his hand resting nearby, open, patient, not pulling. Blood welled on her knee, dark drops landing in the dust like tiny red seeds. He watched them fall, unhurried, waiting until they told him she was still alive, still patchable. The wind shifted. The faded flag on the porch snapped softly, cloth against wood, steady as a metronome. Next door stayed silent. A sparrow tapped its beak on a seed husk overhead. These small sounds stitched the air back together where the iron gate had torn it. In that fragile seam, he pointed to the cloth, tapped his own knee. A simple sign, easy to read. The girl edged forward half a brick, still clutching her pack, and set her knee onto the handkerchief. His fingers touched her skin, warm, thin, stretched tight. He dabbed, not rubbed. Wiped in small circles, slow, giving the dirt room to lift, the cut to show clean. Each time he touched, he pulled back half an inch, waited, then pressed again. His heart slowed, falling in step with the flag's rhythm outside. Urgency gave way to calm. The battlefield shadows still lingered at the corners of his vision, but they no longer commanded him. Her pack slipped a little, zipper catching on the brick. A drawing slipped out, crayon lines of a crooked house, one window glowing yellow, two figures on the steps, one tall, one small, hand in hand. He caught it in a glance, let it be, nudged the zipper so it wouldn't scrape her skin. The sting in her cut eased. She loosened her grip on the straps. Dust-coated fingers pinched the edge of the cloth, half defense, half reply. He tied her shoelace. Threaded, pulled, knotted, tucked the end inside. The action was so familiar it felt like pulling his own seams tight. Done, he slid the handkerchief closer, nodded for her to keep it. Then he stepped back, giving space. The gate stayed shut. No footsteps. No shadows. Only the quiet cooling of iron. He glanced once, then let it go. Once, he would have chased the noise. Now he chose to stay where the noise had cast off what it didn't want. Holding ground took more courage than running it down. He stood, walked inside, filled an old enamel cup at the sink. The first water ran rust, he let it drain, waited for it to clear. The sound of water hitting metal steadied the room. Back on the porch, he set the cup on the step, not in her hands, just close enough. She squinted into the light, hugged the bag higher, freed a hand. Lifted the cup with both hands, sipped slow, careful, like even water might vanish if she rushed. A drop slid from her chin to her shirt. He lifted the cloth once more, dabbed the air, then set it back. Smoke from some faraway fire drifted in, mixing with the cold water smell, the faint iron of blood, the swollen wood of the porch. All of it carried a simple truth: it was just an afternoon again, with people, warmth, and hands doing ordinary work. From the next yard, insects began their evening call, hinting that dusk was touching the ridge. She lowered the cup, placed it where he had set it, as if honoring some silent rule. Tried to zip the pack. Failed. Stopped. He bent, caught the slider with his nails, nudged the teeth into line. The zipper pulled smooth with a clean, tight sound. The blue tassel shook, then lay still. He flattened the straps, shortened a buttonhole so it would rest easier on her shoulder. Small things, barely noticed, but enough to rebuild a little order for a child thrown outside her safe border. Standing, he let his breath fall in with the flap of the flag. The old fear. The shadow always waiting at his neck hadn't left. It just stepped aside, watching, no longer holding the reins. What replaced it was simple recognition: he was home, and from now on, he was responsible for what crossed this threshold. Strength didn't come from battle cries. It came from tying laces, cleaning a scrape, setting a cup of water in its place. Above the porch, the sky dimmed to gray-blue. The old maple sighed in the breeze, shedding a few late leaves. He picked one up, light and brittle, placed it on the step as a marker of a beginning. The girl looked at the leaf, the porch, the open door where a stripe of light stretched across the floor. No words were needed. Things had found their place. The slam of the iron gate was already gone, like it had never been. What remained was the wind, the flag's cloth, the wood's creak, and soon, the sound of two sets of footsteps, one large, one small, rising together. At the porch's edge, the faded flag still stirred, but not weakly. Its rhythm felt steadier now, carrying just enough promise that from here on, this doorway would no longer stand empty. The back door slammed shut, a raw, hollow bang against rotted wood, like a hammer hitting thin sheet metal. The sound rolled through the old house and landed in his chest like a stone. The soldier froze, shoulders locked, body stiff as ice. He'd lived through firefights, blasts, nights when death pressed in close, but his heart had never stumbled the way it did now. This wasn't combat. It was just a door in an abandoned house slamming without reason. Yet it stole his breath, left his chest hollow, lungs clawing for air. He turned, eyes fixed on the dark hallway where the noise had come from. Nobody there. Just a faint strip of light at the end snuffed out, swallowed by layers of black. The hinge still trembled, groaning, thin and steady, like a wound that wouldn't clot. Every note of it dragged him back. To night patrols, to the crash of steel in narrow alleys, to bunker doors dropping shut in rubble. Close your eyes, and he could see the flash, the hands yanking, the smoke and grit blasting his face. He snapped them open, forced himself to stay here. No guns. No enemy. Just a house, a porch, and a child who'd been shoved outside. But that truth didn't slow his pulse. If anything, it ran harder. Out there at least, an enemy had a face, and orders told you what to do. Here, no one came forward, no one spoke. Just a door slamming, a silent hand rejecting a life. He stepped back half a pace, spine pressing the wall. The wood was cold against his shoulder blades, sent a shiver up through his skin. He felt pinned between two fronts, the past clawing back with smoke and noise, and the present closing in with a sealed door. Dust mixed with damp in the hallway air, thick, sticky in his throat. He tried to breathe deep, but it caught halfway, like hitting an invisible wall. The wind outside kept working, brushing the faded flag against its post with a weak but steady rhythm. That sound, frail as it was, gave him a line to hold onto, the way a man in the desert clings to the sight of water. From the porch came other sounds, the unsteady shuffle of small feet, the scrape of a backpack against brick, short breaths sharp and real. Signs of life. He turned toward the open door. The girl was still there, hunched on the steps, gripping her pack like armor. In her eyes he saw it, the same terror he knew too well. Not knowing why she'd been left, not understanding what was happening, only knowing she had to hold on to what little was left. The sight hit him hard, like looking in a mirror, back to the day he came home from war with nothing but a worn bag and a cold urn. The fear in him didn't leave. It changed. No longer the blind panic of being trapped, but a sharper push, make sure that iron door, with its cruel slam, wasn't the last word in anyone's story. He walked onto the porch, boots crunching leaves slow and loud. Every step weighted his chest, but his breath began to steady. He sat on the edge of the step, not touching the child, just close enough so she could feel he was there. He leaned slightly, listened to the wind, let his arm hang loose at his side, no reaching, no pressure. The hinge inside still groaned faintly, but now it blended into other sounds, the insects waking at the fence line, the flag's soft flap, the rustle of leaves. In that fragile chorus, his own breath evened, his pulse slowed. Fear hadn't vanished, but it had moved aside, leaving him room to choose. He set his hand on the worn edge of the step. The grain crumbled under his fingers. Instead of recoiling, he let it ground him. This was wood, not steel. This was a house, not a battlefield. He let that truth sink in. The child peeked at him. For a moment, their eyes locked, and he saw the strange echo, two souls shut out by a door, both trembling at being left, both trying to relearn how to breathe. He nodded slowly, not as a signal to her, but as an oath to himself. There was still a way forward, still reason to stand against the fear pressing in. The battle now wasn't with gunfire or smoke. It was with the cold silence of a door closed. And even in that silence, he found strength in the simplest things: a breath finding its way back, a hand steady enough to clean a wound, eyes clear enough to recognize a life worth keeping close. Out of the shaking came a seed of resilience, fragile but stubborn like the faded flag outside, torn but still refusing to fall. He looked once more at the hallway's darkness, then turned toward the porch's light. And he knew where his choice would be. He would choose the light. His legs wanted to move, but it was like something tied around his ankles was holding him back. An invisible rope, stretched tight. For a moment, time split into scattered pieces of silence: the weak flap of the faded flag outside, the first stir of insects along the fence line, the floorboards still groaning from that door slam. Each sound rose like it came from far off, then dropped away, leaving space wide enough for fear to slip in. His chest tightened. Breath caught halfway, like it hit a cold wall. This was a man who once knew how to fire, crawl, run through smoke and sand, now frozen in his own house because of a door closing without a word. His knees locked. His back stiffened straight as a post. His hand remembered its place on the urn, as if letting go would spill the memory right out of his skin. He didn't step. He closed his eyes for a second. Counted quiet, under his breath: 1, 2, 3. Behind his lids, the white flash of faraway nights, then gone. He saw sand on his lips, smelled half-burned fuel, felt a streak of light cut across his sight. But as the old shadow reached for him, he opened his eyes. In front of him, the porch covered in leaves, a folded handkerchief, a fogged enamel cup, and a small figure clutching a backpack, head down, shoulders trembling. Silence began to take shape. No longer a hole ready to swallow, but a flat surface, something you could float on if you breathed steady. He pressed his lips together. Dropped his shoulders. Turned his foot a little. Rested his shoulder against the wall for balance. His back loosened. Breath in short, out long. Once. Twice. The invisible wall thinned. A soft draft slipped through the doorframe, carrying the damp of earth and the smell of old wood waking. The curtain jerked, dust rose into the evening light like pale smoke. He looked at his hand, cracked skin near the thumb, a patch peeling on the knuckle, slowly lifting from the urn. Not clutching anymore. Empty now, free to work. He picked up the handkerchief that had wiped the child's scraped knee. Folded it once, then again, tucking the dirty side inside. Small, neat, quiet. He laid it on the sill, where the breeze could dry it but not take it away. Everything shrank back into scale: a cloth, a windowsill, a small child curled on the step. The rope around his ankle slackened, not cut, just no longer pulled against. He took a step. The floor creaked. Another. Creak again. A rhythm now. Rhythm was medicine. His heart slowed. His back eased. His shadow slanted across the porch, merging with the long evening light. He stopped on the threshold, 1 foot on wood, 1 foot on the cold brick. The girl looked up. Eyes dry, rims red, like too much wind had passed through them. She didn't back away. Didn't move closer either. Still hugged the backpack, the only shield she had. The strap pressed into her narrow shoulder, leaving a faint groove in the cloth. He bent slightly, tilted himself so the ceiling light shifted off her face. No words. No gesture. Just his body saying, "I'm here." Not closing in, not pulling. His right hand opened, rested on his thigh, finger tapping once against a loose thread. A knock on his own door, steady, steady again. He turned to the kitchen, found a small pot with a blackened bottom. In the cupboard. A can of beans, some broken dry noodles, a bag of salt. No spice. No flavor. Just water and fire. He ran the tap, let the rust drain, filled half the pot. Lit the burner. The flame caught slow, whispered. He broke noodles, dropped beans, pinched salt. The smell rose, plain, warm, enough to remind a house it had once been a kitchen. While it cooked, he went to the side room, pulled out a thin quilt, shook the dust off, carried it to the porch. Spread it on the step above the child, close but not crowding. Slipped old newspaper under for padding. Folded the edges neat, pinned the corners against the breeze. Each move slow, ordered, like stitching the torn edge of fabric. The pot boiled. He poured into a cracked bowl, set it on the step below her. Steam clouded up. He stepped back, leaving space. She looked at it for a long while, as if it was more than she could take in. Then she edged forward, still clutching the bag, pulled the bowl close with her free hand. She blew, soft, took a sip. Heat fogged her eyes, lids dipping. Her shoulders dropped just a fraction. He motioned briefly to the quilt, one finger tapped, pushed in half an inch, then pulled away. Not urging. Not coaxing. She drank again, set the bowl down, looked at the quilt, the porch, then held the backpack tighter to her chest. Outside, the light through the maple leaves broke into coins across the fabric, glowing with sunset. He went to the living room, lifted the urn, carried it to a low shelf. Wiped the dust clean with his palm, left a round space. Set it down straight. No words. No prayer. Just the act of placing it, filling the gap in the wall. Hand on porcelain, skin on cold, then apart again. A quiet inside the larger quiet. On the porch, the bowl was half empty. She pulled the bag down a step, leaned against the post. He brought her a cup of water. Evening had tipped past the ridge, insects loud now. The flag outside no longer snapped, only swayed slow, like a sigh spent. He sat at the inner step, back to the post, head tipped slightly back. The chill slid under his collar, but no longer cut. Inside, the dead clock still held its useless hour, but its hands leaned forward, as if toward motion. He heard the proof of life, his own breath, slower, his muscles uncoiled, his knees steady. Fear was still there, always was, but not on his chest anymore. Just outside, watching, left behind. He looked at her shoes, scuffed at the toes, rubber edges yellowed, a new stain along the side. The laces he'd tied lay neat. On the step, a maple leaf had fallen into a knot of wood grain, like a coin in a wishing well. He picked it up, set it on the quilt. A small act, nothing to the world, but enough to mark that there were two breaths here now. Dark thickened. He opened another window for the air to run through. Took an old sweater from the room, left it by the quilt. Collected the bowl and cup, rinsed them in the sink. The water's hiss filled the kitchen, the kind of sound houses made when they were lived in. Even the squeak of the faucet softened. He turned the bowl upside down, wiped the counter dry in small circles, as if he'd never stopped. When he came back, the girl had leaned further into her pack, head tilted toward the first star over the roofline. He didn't block her view. Sat inside the step, same space as before. A bat skimmed past the eaves. Next door, the iron gate stayed shut, silent as stone. But here, there was breath, the rustle of cloth, the faint smell of beans and noodles fading into the night. Dark took over. He pulled the front doors together halfway, left a slim slice of light. Enough for the air to move, enough to hear the insects, enough to see the small shape outside. On the shelf, the urn stood still, its clean circle carved in the dust, a promise unspoken. He kept watch from the step for a long time, not by hours, but by the count of breaths steadied, by the number of times the flag outside shifted, by the circles of the bat's flight. His eyes adjusted. The edges softened. The ground no longer shook. The hallway door behind stayed closed, but no longer looked like a mouth waiting to swallow. Just a door that needed a new hinge. The child slipped into sleep without warning, shoulders dropping, hands loosening on the pack, head tilting to the softer side. He nudged the quilt higher, tucked it over her knees, then pulled back, resting his hands on his own. Let the wind talk. In the last quiet of the day, he understood. The rope at his ankles had loosened not so he could run, but so he could step right. Courage wasn't stomping fear down. It was standing long enough to let fear pass, then doing small things. Boiling noodles, laying a quilt, setting an urn in its place, keeping watch over a new sleep. Outside, the faded flag still stirred, slow and steady, like the chest of someone at rest. And here, on this porch, the silence no longer strangled. It opened wide enough to hold two people, an old backpack, and a first night without running. The girl lifted her head, brushed her shirt sleeve across the dust clinging like chalk. No tears, just eyes that slid away, avoiding him, like everything around her was too bright to look it straight on. The porch still held the warmth of where she'd been sitting, but the space between them, one grown, one small, swelled into a wall, thick enough to press the air tight. For years gone had carved a hollow the wood itself seemed to echo, the floor gave a muted creak, afraid to carry sound across. He shifted his weight. Knees bent slightly, back straight, hands open and resting on his thighs. He didn't reach for her. Didn't close the space. Just slowed his heart, counting in time with the faded flag flapping outside, 1, 2, 3. The wind slipped through the roofline, carrying damp maple leaves and the thin thread of wood smoke from somewhere far off. In the narrow light spilling across the doorway, dust motes kept turning, colliding in silence like memory brushing up against the present with no one willing to claim it. She tugged at her backpack strap, shortening the buttonhole by half a notch, the same spot he had fixed just moments earlier. Her way of saying, without words, I can do it myself. The shoulder of her shirt was worn, a loose thread sticking up like a fishbone. She smoothed it down, but it sprang back, stubborn. Her eyes avoided him, skimming the floor, the doorway, settling on a strip of fading sunlight on the porch edge like a boat tied to a post. He rose, walked inside, his steps slow but firm against the boards. In the kitchen, he opened a drawer, rummaged through an old first aid tin. Cloth tape, a dull needle, a scrap of black thread wound tight on cardboard, a pair of scissors gone soft at the edge. He didn't return right away. He laid out the sweater he'd carried earlier, shook it free of dust, folded it neat into a square, set it beside a faded cotton pillow that still held the smell of sun from years ago. Then he came back to the porch, sat, and pulled needle and thread. No asking, no demanding. He lifted his own shirt sleeve and stitched the loose seam at the shoulder, short, steady stitches, each one like writing out a breath by hand. The click of needle against fabric was small, but his heart found a little calm there. The girl leaned on the post, shoes crossed, one toe worn through. He touched the faint height mark on the doorframe, left the dust on his finger. A dead clock straightened, the urn steady, silent order where words failed. She opened a frayed notebook, a house, two figures, hands close, faces blank. She shut it tight. Outside, insects droned. He set a sweater on the step. She looked, didn't touch. The 4 years still stood. He didn't try to break it. He turned back in, gathered the dry leaves with an old broom, swept them into 3 neat piles. Each stroke stretched and dropped with his breath. He opened another window, let the wind flow through instead of battering the porch. The air shifted, dust left instead of settling. The wall between them sat surrounded now by small winds, by small tasks, as if the house was learning how to breathe again. She stood, backpack in one arm, smoothing her shirt with the other. The scrape on her knee had already tightened, red mark shrinking like a pomegranate seed. She took half a step, then stopped. Her eyes flicked toward the enamel cup turned upside down on the step. He picked it up, poured fresh water. Didn't hand it over. Set it down. Stepped back. The distance stayed, but no longer as a pit. More like a path unpaved. Walkable, if she chose. Standable, if she needed time. He opened the side room off the hall, pushed a sticking door. A small bed inside, sheets wrinkled, a stuffed bear missing an ear turned to the wall. He didn't touch the bear. Just pulled the sheet tight, laid a thin blanket, folded the edge sharp like an invitation unsaid. On the wall, silver star stickers, faded, half peeled. He picked one up from the dresser, pressed it back on, held his finger there a moment for the glue to warm. It stuck, stayed a tiny light finding its place again. The porch darkened another shade. She drew the sweater toward herself, didn't wear it, just laid it over her lap, hands tucked into the knit. Her eyes still skittered, but not as sharp. She looked into the side room, then out toward the yard. The maple leaf he had placed earlier had split in two, the halves still lying together, not yet pulled apart by wind. He sat on the inner step, back to the post, his body a quiet shape asking nothing. Wind touched his collar, whispered that night was here. In those stretched minutes, the wall of 4 years shifted, less a barricade, more a flat surface where two shadows stretched and overlapped at the edges. Not crossing. Just touching. The slam from the back door that afternoon shrank into a memory set aside on the shelf, no longer pressing against his lungs. He heard his own breath again, in steady, out deeper. Heart low, not racing. This was how strength came, not in bursts, but through 100 small things, tightening a stitch, setting a cup, smoothing a sheet, pressing back a fallen star. None of it would impress the world. But enough for a house to know it hadn't been abandoned. The girl placed her backpack down, careful, like setting down something precious. She unzipped a notch, slipped the sweater halfway inside, left a piece hanging loose to grab later. Her fingers traced the worn patch, circled once, stopped. She didn't look at him. Didn't call. Just held on to softness so her hands wouldn't stay cold. He rose, switched on the small lamp in the living room. Thin yellow light spread, not enough to erase the dark, but enough to warm the wall. He cracked the front door wider, easing the whistle of the wind. The urn caught a sliver of glow, porcelain flashing short like a fingernail. His eyes touched it once, then let it be. By the time the moon cleared the roofline, cracks in the patio bricks showed like a map. She stood, shifted her bag, then sat one step closer to the door. The gap between them shrank, not by persuasion, but because night pulls you toward the light. 4 years still stood. But the wall had a crack, and through it, a thin beam of yellow slid like water through stone. He didn't stare at it. He kept his eyes low, following an ant dragging a crumb larger than itself along the step, lost 3 times before finding safety in a crevice. The house breathed the same way, slow, steady, hurting no one. He boiled water again, plain, poured it into an old thermos, tightened the lid. Set it by the step, a quiet promise of warmth later. She pulled the sweater from her bag, draped it over her shoulders without slipping her arms through. The smell of old wool and long ago sunlight settled over her thin frame. She sat still, eyes on the empty space beyond the porch, where the dust had stopped spinning. A dry leaf had caught in her hair, jagged edge yellowed. He didn't reach to take it. Left it there, proof the day had passed. As the insects lowered their pitch, marking the deeper night, he closed the doors another notch, leaving just a strip of light at eye level. Outside, the air eased. Inside, the lamp glowed steady. She leaned slightly, no longer braced against the post but resting on the doorframe. The wall of 4 years didn't fall, but it bore its first crack, felt not in sight, but in the way her shoulders eased, in the way she didn't push the sweater away. Thick and yellow. He went back inside and set one leaf down on the notebook, beside the pencil tree. She startled, then looked at the leaf, her eyes widening a little. She didn't push it away. Her finger brushed the veins of the leaf, then she set it down next to a sketched apple. A strange pairing, a pencil tree and a real leaf, 2 worlds pressed together on the same page. The soldier eased back into his chair, drawing a slow breath. His daughter's eyes softened, no longer pulled so tight like a string ready to snap. She closed the notebook and tucked the leaf inside, as if to keep the moment instead of letting it blow away. He exhaled, lightened, like he'd just crested a hill. Outside, the wind kept at the window, but the sound no longer threatened, it was just background now. Inside, the lamplight poured over the closed book, over the table. He looked at his daughter and saw for the first time that her silence had carried a gift, a chance. Fragile as an empty swing, but real. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, whether the wall between them would crumble or grow higher. But tonight, that apple tree in her notebook had planted a seed. And for once, his chest beat with something more than fear, there was a flicker of hope. He got up, shut the window so the glass wouldn't rattle. When he turned back, she had slipped the notebook into her backpack and smoothed the fabric with her hand. Her eyes didn't dart away completely this time, they lingered on him for a moment before moving off. Just a moment, but enough. That night, as the oil lamp burned down, he sat remembering the picture. The trunk, the fallen apples, the empty swing, the real leaf pressed inside. He knew then that trust doesn't always start with words. sometimes it begins with a shaky sketch on worn paper. And in the silence that filled the room, he could almost hear hope breathing, thin, fragile, but real. The next morning, sunlight slid down the faded roof tiles, the early breeze carrying the damp that lingered from the night. The soldier stepped onto the porch with a rusty hammer in his hand. The metal rattled in his calloused grip, heavy but familiar. He looked up at the sagging roofline, beams slipped out of place, tiles cracked, rain had dripped steady on the doorstep through every storm season. That roof had once sheltered his boyhood and all those summers of his late uncle. Now it leaned, crooked, like the memory of a family left untended. He went to work. Each strike was slow, steady, never rushed. The hammer met the nail with a solid thunk. A sound that carried out and then faded, no different from his own heart trying to find a steady rhythm again. He wasn't just driving nails into wood, he was driving them into memory. Each hit was an effort to rebuild a roof for both of them, a roof that had once failed to protect, but now needed another chance. The girl sat on the steps, her backpack across her lap, watching quietly. Her eyes followed every swing, every board pried loose, every nail driven down. Instead of looking away, she studied him longer, less guarded. Now and then, she bent to add a line or two in her notebook, then looked back up, as though she were measuring each blow with her pencil strokes. Morning light spilled across his face, showing the lines etched deep around his eyes. Sweat slid down, mixing with sawdust into a salty streak. Every time he stopped, leaning on his knee to catch a breath, she was still there, hadn't walked off. That silent presence was like a thin trickle of water across dry ground. Seeping in, slowly, without anyone noticing at first. He pulled off a broken tile and set in another he'd salvaged from the pile out back. His hands trembled, but he held his pace. A nail bent, he pulled it out, straightened it, tried again. The girl blinked, almost like she understood even her father couldn't get everything right the first time. That truth seemed to soften the distance between them. As the roofline began to level, the morning sun slipped through fewer cracks, leaving a steady shade over the porch. He sank down onto the steps, wiped his forehead with his sleeve. The girl opened her pack, flipped to yesterday's page, and drew the roof above her apple tree. This time, under the roof, she sketched two small figures, not detailed, not with faces, but side by side. He caught a glimpse of it, and his chest burned hot, but he stayed quiet. The hammer fell silent. Only the birds on the old trellis carried on. The roof stood firm again, like an arm stretched out in protection. The soldier knew the work wasn't finished, there were walls to patch, long boards to paint. But this morning he had started. And she had seen it. That was the difference, he wasn't alone in the work anymore. He leaned against the post, his eyes drifting to his daughter. She closed the notebook, resting her hand on the cover, not hiding it, but keeping it open in her palm, like a quiet agreement. He swallowed hard, then let his breath go, letting the silence soften around them. Above, the sky seemed whiter under the repaired eaves. Light no longer crashed straight through but filtered gently between the wood, golden, like memory strained into something that could be held. He sat still, knowing every strike of the hammer that morning had done more than fix a roof, it had chipped away at the space between them, working toward the day when they could both stand under one roof without fearing it might collapse. The girl taped her drawing to the wall, thin paper, edges smudged with graphite, held up by two strips of yellowed tape. A simple apple tree, a few small round fruits, and beneath it two figures sitting side by side. Next to them, a house with its door open, the doorway glowing like a square of gold against the gray pencil. Fragile, but real, like a string holding a kite that almost broke loose. The soldier stood behind her, watching. She stretched on tiptoe, hands trembling as she pressed the corners flat. No words, no glance, just the picture on the wall. On the stained wood, it looked small, almost lost, yet in that smallness there was a flicker of light. He felt it hit him, like a pebble dropped in still water. He thought of the old letters from his uncle, opened the door, let the wind pass through. And here his daughter had drawn exactly that, an open door. She hadn't spoken it, hadn't written it, but she hung it there, a quiet admission that this house still had room for two. The room shifted. The lamp's yellow glow lit the paper brighter. Outside, the evening wind slipped through the crack in the door, making the paper quiver like breath. The squeal of the gate gave way to birds settling home. The years between them didn't vanish, but the sketch filled a piece of the gap. He stepped closer, hand half raised, then stopped. Instead of touching the paper, he pressed his palm to the wall beside it, letting the feeling go through the wood. The girl caught him. She didn't look away. Her eyes stayed a beat, then returned to the drawing. The silence wasn't sharp anymore. It was a pause, a rest in a long song. She sat, scribbled in another notebook, erased, tried again. He didn't pry. But when she closed it, a line peeked out, under the apple tree, just a fragment, but enough for his chest to stir. Words beginning to stand beside pictures. He went out to the porch. The roof beams he'd fixed yesterday held steady under the afternoon sun. And inside, the drawing was proof this roof now covered too. She folded the blanket, stacked her pencils, set the backpack neatly in the corner. Not clutched to her chest, but standing upright, like it belonged. Small, but to him it meant consent. This place could be shelter. Before dark, he shut the door. The hinge gave a soft, steady click, no longer harsh. He turned back, the drawing swayed gently in the draft, two figures beneath the apple tree. One of those shadows was no longer just on paper. And that was enough for him to believe tomorrow could be different, the door a little wider, the light a little stronger, the string holding just a bit firmer through the night. At dusk, the two of them sat on the porch. The orange light spilled across the cracks of the house, lighting them up like scenes stitched in fire. The roof he'd fixed still smelled of pine tar, sunlight slipping through small gaps, laying stripes on the ground. No words. Just whined through the eaves and the faded flag lifting steady, like the house itself was breathing out after a long day. The soldier leaned back against a post, hands resting on his knees. His body still carried the ache of work, but the tightness had eased. Out in the yard, the apple tree stood dark against the red sky, its thin branches reaching upward, a few small fruit trembling in the breeze. It looked just like the one his daughter had drawn, only rougher, older. She sat beside him, legs swinging, heels tapping the wood. Her pack leaned against the wall, notebook in her lap, but she didn't draw, just held it, staring off at the fading light. Her hair brushed her shoulders, shifting with the wind. She looked small in the glow, but no longer shrunken like before. She sat steady now, as if she'd learned to share the space without fear. Birds called from the roof, insects rose from the garden. The sounds filled the silence. He picked up a fallen leaf, rolled it between his fingers, then set it down beside them. She glanced at it, then back at the horizon. No flinch, no retreat. Their shadows stretched long, sliding into each other, almost parallel. And in that quiet, he knew healing sometimes came not from words, but from sitting side by side, watching the sun go down. The wind softened, carrying wood smoke from town. The last line of light caught the wooden frame inside, where her apple tree drawing hung. She exhaled, set her notebook down, hands resting on her lap. No words, but her ease said enough, this place now held a seat for her. He closed his eyes, let the orange light press against his lids, heartbeat slow. And in that calm he understood, he didn't need to break the silence. If they kept this porch, this seat, day after day, the wall between them would fall on its own. What remained was simple, a father and a daughter, sitting in the evening wind, letting life piece back together what war had cut apart. The soldier thought to himself, war had stripped so much, wiped out friends, ruined harvests, emptied the house itself. But what remained at kindness, and the choice to stay, that was the saving grace. Not the medals, not the distant praise, but something simple, sitting under a porch roof, listening to the wind, watching his daughter draw an apple tree with an open door. He breathed slow, letting the scent of fresh-cut wood and cooking fires settle in his chest. The girl leaned against the porch post now, no longer pulling away. Inside, the thin paper drawing still trembled with the breeze, the two figures under the apple tree looking almost alive. Sunset gave way, shadows folding into the roof just rebuilt. In that silence, the story didn't end with tears or promises, but with a quiet question meant for anyone watching. When loss has passed, do you have the patience to stay, to hold on to what's left and let it become the place to begin again? The soldier came back with no glory, only the old porch and a child's fragile gaze. The story closed in silence, where kindness and simply staying became the only salvation. And maybe each of us has our own apple tree to return to. Branches broken, yet still standing in the wind.